Hello and welcome to the Parents Guide. This is where you'll find out what's going on in schools and hear some of the key issues being discussed from the parents' point of view. If you have school-aged children, this programme is for you. We'll be focusing on health and well-being in secondary schools with two parents, Leslie King and Alison Wood.
Hello.
We're also joined by education consultant Meg Martin, who has a great deal of experience in personal, social and health education.
Hello.
We've been looking at some programmes from Teachers TV and we'll be showing some extracts during our discussion. These programmes were made for teachers, but they also open up a window for parents to look into classrooms and see what's going on in schools today. One of the big issues is the number of girls dropping out of PE in their teenage years. In our first clip, we go to Priesthorpe School in Leeds to hear what girls think of PE and sport.
You think you've got to show off in front of him because boys are always better at sports than you and they just think they're so good. It puts me off because you're not concentrating on yourself, you're concentrating on trying to be better than them all the time.
Problems that we were experiencing were that as the girls got older, they didn't want to wear the kind of PE kit that they'd been wearing when they were younger. They hated going outside in the winter. They didn't like participating in team games all the time. They wanted to do something that was for themselves.
The PE staff at Priesthorpe decided to develop an inclusion policy sensitive to the needs of teenage girls.
One of the first things we wanted to do was sit down and talk to the girls, and we're constantly trying to talk to the girls and get them to speak to us, because the student voice is very important, and we can organise all kinds of activities and make changes, but if it's not what they really want, it's pointless.
The first changes at Priesthorpe were to the PE kit. For the older girls, the traditional shorts were scrapped and replaced with more casual tracksuit bottoms.
The older girls love wearing the tracksuit bottoms. They like them because they're fashionable. They are much less self-conscious. They're not worried about what their legs look like to everyone else. And you can tell them as many times as you like that they look perfectly fine, but they would much rather cover up, wear tracksuit bottoms and feel comfortable about the fact that they're then going to take part in physical activity.
Alison, did you feel any sympathy with the girls in that clip?
Yes, I did. I think we can all remember what it was like growing up and being very conscious of how we appeared in front of our peers, and particularly in mixed sessions where you're in team competitive spirit games where the boys like to shine, and I think you're very conscious then that you're on show. So the question of changing the kit, I think, was a very important one, just that they felt comfortable from the outset.
Leslie, did that bring back some not very nice memories of your school days?
Yes. I mean, I really empathise with some of those girls because I hated sport at school. You know, a group of us, you know, wagging PE and hiding in the chemistry labs to get out of it, you know, even though we knew we were going to be punished later because we just hated rounders and hated the short skirts we had to wear. So, you know, I think this is, if more schools are going along this road, it's a very good thing.
Do you think that this is something schools might consider to motivate girls, having single-sex lessons?
Not just considering it, they've been doing it for years. Oh. I taught PE back in the 80s, and we had most of our sessions as single-sex then. So some of these things are not new ideas, but what I did like is the fact that they've asked the girls, what will help you participate more? And things like the kit. Now, that is a more recent move, that they've gone along with what the girls have said they really want. The national curriculum is still fairly games focused, even though there are other activities they can do. But I think at Key Stage 4 there's far more choice now, and with specialists coming in to support the curriculum either during the teaching time or as extracurricular activities, we can offer far greater range and therefore getting them enjoying it right the way through to when they leave school.
That's quite an important point, Leslie, isn't it? Because one of the reasons a lot of school sport sort of tailed off in the 80s was that teachers stopped taking these out-of-school activities and the onus went on to the parents to do it. But do you think schools ought to be running clubs after school?
Yes, I do actually. Yes, I do, because I think in a way really the after school club is much less competitive and much more something that you do because you want to do it. But no, there's no after school rugby club because the school haven't got the licensed person to run it, you know.
There are difficulties, aren't there, Meg? And there are child protection issues now with people running clubs after school. But do you think teachers will come back to running after-school activities in this way?
Some of us never gave up. Some did. Schools did vary. But we've got a lot more sports development officers or school sports coordinators who service a whole borough and who can set up specific clubs as long as the school has got the actual environment in which to do it, because you've got constraints on that as well. If you're a small school built in a very sort of concrete built-up area, you may not have the physical facilities, and a lot of schools had to sell off games areas, playing fields, you know, so you're limited by some things, but we are getting a lot more specialists in because teachers cannot do it all.
OK, well, in the next clip, we're going to look at health and fitness and diet. And we look at school food and an inspirational school cook, Pat Kendall. She sees her role as dinner granny in New Siblen School, a special school in South Gloucestershire. Pat even gets involved in growing food for the kitchen with the help of the pupils.
It's just the smells of it. I mean, the children come and touch and smell, don't they?
Yes, they do. Because every Friday there's fish with some sort of fish with a parsley sauce. So one Friday it was all our parsley. There was a huge amount of it, and they were very impressed with that. That was really direct, I think. They could really see that.
South Gloucestershire Council wants all school cooks to use much more organic food and much less junk food. The policy doesn't have to be prohibitively expensive.
A lot of schools now, they'll just, when they go in, they don't have a healthy choice. But here, they don't have all they have is a healthy choice. They don't have anything else. Wouldn't even dream of doing it to them. Too many additives and too many E's in a lot of food now. And if you can treat people with special needs on proper, good cooked food with all the vitamins that they need, it's better than them popping pills, and that's the way I feel. If we don't get organic, we get all fresh. I don't like using frozen food. I mean, obviously sometimes you've got to. Our organic potatoes.
How do you afford to have so much organic food?
We have got a budget to keep to, but we go to sort of, our sort of suppliers, and they're pretty generous. So as long as you sort of keep within your budget, we do like to use as much organic vegetables, fruit as we can.
Leslie, what did you think of the dinner granny?
Well, she was quite inspiring, really, wasn't she? I mean, she was very enthusiastic and very committed. And the thing that struck me about the programme was that she was involved in the school as a whole. And I mean, I love the idea of her being involved in them growing their own food, and that would be fantastic. But I'm not sure about the logistics of actually doing that in a large, particularly in a large secondary school, you know.
Alison, what do you think is the best that a school could take out of that idea? Maybe not adopt it all, but...
I think elsewhere it showed how she'd actually implemented what they were being taught in the classroom. They'd had a Victorian week, and she tried to serve up the sort of food that they would have eaten in Victorian days, and I thought that was very good at primary level. But at secondary level, again, I think it's going to be difficult to implement some of those changes, and time again, because often in the lunch break they're trying to fit in music practice and perhaps a games practice, all these extras, or they're now working to Continental Day and lunch is actually half an hour.
One of the things that struck me about it, Meg, was the chef saying that some years ago they used to cook herbs so that people could have garnish on their school dinners, and now they're doing it again there. So the ideas come full circle, and I mean, aren't parents entitled to have the good ideas?
I like the idea of possibly being able to grow things. It could be that I've worked in schools where we had a gardening club, and it was the year sort of 7, 8 and 9 youngsters who led on that. It was their own particular project. But in a London schools, you can build artificial growing areas. So, you know, again, we're trying to get youngsters to realise where things grow from, to be able to tend them, and for them to end up on their plates.
I mean, another issue for secondary schools, Alison, is pupils going out at lunchtime. I mean, if they can get a better class of rubbish outside, why should they stay and eat whatever the school's offering, even if it is vaguely nutritionally balanced? And
so many bring in a packed lunch from home. I say packed lunch because very often they've prepared it themselves. So it can consist of a chocolate bar, bag of crisps, and maybe, thrown in for good measure, some sort of healthy sandwich. But very often, even if they're bringing it from home, it's not necessarily what you would want your child to eat. But that again is perhaps, you know, things are, time is precious in the morning, everybody's rushing here, there and everywhere, and perhaps parents slip into this feeling, oh, the child can prepare their own lunch, it's going to be fine, but don't actually monitor what over a combination of weeks they've absorbed.
So Meg, do you think that schools ought to be looking at this whole issue of children making their own lunches and then possibly not really even eating them, even though they have brought them in themselves?
On the clip that we saw, there was very little resistance at all in eating more healthily. What you tend to get, and I think some people are worried about, is that if we change the menus too much, pupils will boycott the school meals, but in time they nearly all come back, and as everybody is more informed about the healthy eating drive, you know, that they will take up the school lunch. It'd be very hard though to sort of police the packed lunch issue at secondary school. All we can do is keep reinforcing the messages through the curriculum, reinforcing it through what we have ourselves, trying to get parents to help and support us, you know, so that we do end up with a better overall nutritional service for the schools.
OK, well now we're going to look at another issue that concerns most parents, which is sex and relationship education, and visit Kings Manor Community College in Shoreham, where SRE teacher Claire Barr is conducting an experiment with her Year 9 pupils.
It's gone quite red, so it's acidic.
Yep.
It's gone red, it's got acid in it.
When they see the results, they're really surprised. They can't understand how they had water, or they thought they had water, and how so many people in the class have actually now got a substance that's a mixture of water and an acid.
Greenish.
Greenish, yeah. So let's see. Let's have a show of hands. How many people would say they still had pure water? A couple of green ones. Excellent. Right. What do you think is the point of doing that activity?
Is it about like having sex or something and then getting something from someone else, like HIV or stuff like that?
Okay, yeah, good answer. Thanks, Simon. Who else had their hand up?
Even though only 2 people started off with like the acid, it turned into like quite a lot of people, so it spread quite quickly across the classroom.
Excellent. Only 2 people started with acid, and all but 2 people in the class ended up with some acid in their fluid.
When she said it was about the acids being passed around into each cup, I realised it was about sex education and HIV and sexually transmitted infections.
Like then she's talking about like only 2 people and then putting the...
And then passing it on and how it gets passed on so quickly.
Alison, what did you think of that lesson? It certainly seemed to make an impact on them.
Yes, I thought it was a very clever approach, actually. I liked the way that when the children actually entered the room, they had no idea what was going to happen. And then she took them through it, revealing step by step what was they'd actually seen and the reason behind it all. And really that sort of led a parallel with real life, that if they find themselves in a situation that they hadn't had time to think about beforehand, what would they do? And the implications of actually what was happening, you could see it dawning on their faces.
Leslie, they seemed very at ease discussing these,
they did.
what are rather scary concepts in a way. Do you feel as a parent you're perfectly happy for this to be going on in school and not necessarily knowing that's what they're discussing in lessons?
It struck me that probably a lot of parents actually have no idea just how much the children are being taught in school. But I think that was a very good lesson, and I think if my children were to be taught about these issues in that sort of way, I'd be very happy with that.
Meg, how far do you think parents really do know what goes on in sex education lessons at secondary school?
Probably not as much as many parents would wish. I think one of the things that schools are very concerned about, if their pupils come from a very varied, multicultural, multi-faith community, I think many schools are concerned as to whether parents would then withdraw their children, even though very few actually do in reality. And what we'd always say is, isn't it best that your child is at school receiving the lesson firsthand than hearing about the information, you know, through friends and other people? But some teachers are still very concerned about teaching SRE. That was an example of a very good lesson. That was a deputy head. And more the government, Ofsted and advisors like myself recommend that it's taught by a specialist team of teachers who feel comfortable delivering it, who are trained And I think then parents again would feel more happy with how the school is delivering, what they're covering. But at any time, you should ask schools, if you wish to as parents. You can see the curriculum, you should see the policy, and we're trying to get parents involved in developing those.
The moral issues are, of course, very controversial, because whose morals is the school teaching? Are they teaching their morals, or a nationally agreed set of morals, or do they have to reflect what the parents' morals might be? And of course, one of the reasons this is taking place is to try and curb the teenage pregnancy rate. So do you have to inject some morality to really make that effective?
Well, I think that's a difficult one, because, you know, teachers aren't really there to give our children their morals as such. I think this has got to be the responsibility of parents. And, you know, you're going to get the whole range of morality, you know, across the spectrum. But I still think that young people have a right to be informed, quite frankly, and I think that they have a right to have accurate information, and I don't think that necessarily parents do that very well.
But Meg, can we curb the teenage pregnancy rate without injecting some morality into this debate? At some point, do we have to say, look, it's not okay to have sex if you're 15?
Yeah, one of the key aims is to delay onset of full sexual activity, and we are slowly, as we get better sex and relationships education happening in the classroom, we are knowing that that is the case, where we've actually done some controlled teaching with evaluations, you know, before and after. Youngsters are saying that they are delaying the onset of sex. And then if they are sexually active, one of the other aims is then to say, well, we'll make it safer sex.
Well, that raises some quite big moral issues, and our next clip comes from a programme called Duty of Care and deals with pupils having sex. The clip shows the discussion of a fictional case with teachers and other professionals and with moderator Professor Ted Ragg. We joined the discussion just as the parent of a 16-year-old has discovered the word clinic in her daughter's diary for that day. What she doesn't know, but the school does, is that her daughter is pregnant and having an abortion. The parent phones the school and speaks with her teacher.
Now, you've got a very angry mum.
Understandably.
And a very worried mum.
Understandably.
And you're consulting a colleague. It might take a bit of time, but Juliet isn't home.
I want to know where she is. Do you know where she is? You do, don't you?
I mean, I can't sit there on the end of a telephone and tell barefaced lies to a parent, so I would have to say, yes, I do know where she is. And again, this is not something I would try and do by myself. I wouldn't shoulder the responsibility solely by myself.
She's on the phone at the moment.
Yes, and I've said to her that I'm going to consult with a colleague first, and then I'd actually get back to her query.
Why do you need to consult?
And I'll explain to you that when I get back to you, and I would have consulted with a colleague first. And that is how I would deal with it.
What's your reaction to that, Nonnie?
All 16-year-old girls think they're mature. She's not mature. She's lovely, she works hard, she plays the violin, but she is not mature. She needs me in this decision. I need to know what's going on. And I need the people who see more of her every day than I do to tell me what's going on.
If they think it's in her best interest.
Well, how do you know what her best interests are?
The teachers have to make that judgment call, is all I'm saying. And they may make the decision that it's not in her best interest to tell you as a mother.
I think all this po-faced legalistic stuff is rubbish.
Leslie, that was quite provocative stuff. Did you find yourself coming down on one side or the other in the argument?
It was very difficult. Before I'd actually watched that clip, I must say I was probably one of these parents who thought, parents have a right to know. I have a right to know everything concerning my child. But having watched that, I have to say I have more sympathy with teachers. And I have to say that I think ultimately what is in the best interests of my child is what should matter. So it's difficult, but I am more sympathetic towards the difficulties faced by teachers. And I think that's probably a programme that all parents of secondary school children should see, because it does really make you much more aware of the difficulties that teachers face.
Alison, that was the most cutting moment, was when the teacher said, well, why hasn't your daughter told you? Do you think if you'd accepted that your daughter hadn't told you, that you'd be prepared, therefore, to accept that you didn't have the right to know?
I think that's very hard for a parent to accept that there's something that a child won't tell you or can't discuss with you. I think when they're at primary level, you know exactly what they're involved at, and it comes to the years when they're growing up as a teenager, they're becoming their own independent self, and you have to accept that gradually there is a sort of separation as they find their own independency. But at the same time, over major issues like this, you still feel very much, I want to be in there, I want to know what's going on. And like you say, it's when you watch something like that, you really appreciate the tightrope that teachers walk, and how difficult it is to get that balance and that decision making right.
A lot of parents may not understand that there are legal rulings on these things, and are they more important, do you think, than the parents' wishes?
Well, the legal aspects are written very clearly, but they're very hard sometimes to apply. It makes it quite clear in the guidance that we have that there's no legal duty to inform either the head teacher or the parents of a disclosure, unless the school policy actually requires them to do so. So some schools will have already worked through that, and maybe the head teacher does want to know whenever there's a situation like that. In the same way, for the medical profession, the Fraser guidelines say that somebody from the medical profession can give advice and treatment to any young person as long as they're deemed to have the knowledge and intelligence to understand what that treatment would be. Now, that's fine in writing, but we've seen here it leaves it all still back to the professionals to make those hard decisions.
There was another issue in that film, if you saw the beginning of it, which was that the child was 15 when she first started having sex. Now, is there a distinction for schools to make between students doing something that isn't legal and when it is legal, then they should have right to confidentiality?
It's not so much the legality of the age. If you get a disclosure, like two people under 16 having sex, or at least one of the girlies usually, we have three things to do. One is to try and convince that young person to tell their families, to tell their parents. That's very strongly written into the guidelines, but we can't force them. The second one is to consider, are there child protection issues? And that's where the age is important. And the third aspect we have to consider is that we have to make sure we've given them information about the local support services.
OK, well, we're going to look at another issue now, which I know concerns a lot of parents, which is drugs. And in our last clip, we see how PSHE teacher Sally George tackles drugs with her Year 8 class. The pupils have just completed an activity sorting the street names of drugs into 9 categories.
Well done, Mark. Top right, ecstasy. Let's have a look. There's one right.
That's mine.
E. Well done, Jodie. E. But I'm a bit worried about the hatties, the sillies and the uppers. So, shh. Lee.
Does Happy's go in magic mushrooms?
Certainly does.
So good.
Ben.
Does sillies go in crack?
No. Mark.
Does sillies go in magic mushrooms?
Yes. Go move it. Right, OK. Is there any questions on that you want to ask or you're not sure about? Mark, you got your hand up.
That has
Temazepam.
That sounds a bit like diazepam.
And it is of the same family. How do you know about diazepam?
It's on Metal Gear Solid.
It was on Metal Gear Solid. Oh, hello, we're playing PlayStation here. OK. With something like drugs, if they will talk, if it will roll, then, and it's relevant to what we're talking about, you've got to let it happen, because that is what's happening there and now for that child, and that's much more part of PSHE, because that's much more part of life, which is what makes it real for them. Harry.
There might be some questions you can't answer. So how do you deal with those?
Some people who are on heroin who are coming off it, there's another drug that...
Methadone.
That's the one. And is that class A?
Because
that's prescribed.
Methadone, classification of drugs. Do you know, I can't do it off the top of my head. I'd have to look it up for you, Wesley.
Alison, does it worry you as a parent that 12 and 13-year-olds there are being taught about drugs that they may not even have heard about?
I think the important thing that I picked up from that clip is just what that member staff said. I like the way she took them up to the board and they put the street names of the drugs against the names to match them, and then they were able to see if they're thinking correctly, if they got it as it is. And again, when she was asked a question, she didn't hesitate to say, I don't know, I'll have to find out for you. And again, this rapport and the trust that was then there amongst the whole group.
Leslie, would you rather they got it from school rather than from the street?
Oh yes, definitely, yes. I mean, when I first watched that programme, I was a bit shocked actually that my 12-year-old was going to be taught that much information about drugs. Actually, probably he knows an awful lot more than I think. And it's better that he has the facts. And let's face it, you know, even at that age nowadays, they're encountering coming into contact with drugs in some way, even if it's just because they've heard about somebody else who's using it, you know. So I think, yeah, I think it's probably is a good idea, yeah.
Do you think schools should be more proactive, though, about telling parents what they're teaching in their drugs education?
Not necessarily more proactive. Again, the more schools work with the parents, the more they will encourage them to come in. We often have drugs evenings where parents are very welcome, but they're not very highly attended. So schools that even go right down the line to say, you know, this is for you, come and see the programme, come and see the policy. Most parents in the end are just quite happy with and quite relieved that the schools are delivering drug education.
Was that a good lesson? And what are the characteristics
Yeah,
of
that
good
was a
drug
good
education?
lesson. I mean, clarifying knowledge, getting rid of myths and misinformation. But what she would do with it then is about the skills, knowing about the risks, knowing how to resist peer pressure. And we have to really concentrate not so much on the illegal drugs, but on the alcohol, the tobacco and the solvents and the cannabis. They are the 4 drugs, particularly around transition time, just before secondary school and early years of secondary school, where they're much more likely to take up these habits or to come to grief with them. So,
do you think actually showing parents films of what goes in the classroom would be a much better way of informing them about?
Probably, yes, yeah. I mean, I feel much better informed after having watched these programmes. Surprised almost to the point of shocked, I think, a bit, actually, at just how much, you know, my son's being taught. But when I reflect on it, I think, well, it has to be done, and I think that really it's an age where, like I said before, children I don't think really my son wants to hear about STIs from me, to be honest, or his father. And I think, you know, and even drugs, I think it probably is a good setting to do it if it's done properly.
Well, I think it's very encouraging that parents find it helpful watching films like that, but we have to end it there. You can have your say, though, by emailing parents@teachers.tv, and you can find all the information about programmes you have seen and more on our website at Teachers TV, details at the end of this programme. Thanks to my guests, Leslie, Alison and Meg.
Goodbye.
And from me, Fiona Miller, thanks for joining us, and until next time, goodbye.